Check, 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 check. Check it out now. Okay, we're going to skip the normal slides, but give a quick shout out to our lovely sponsors, of which I think you all know. OpenTable, I'm probably going to forget some, Carbon 5, UTC, et cetera, et cetera. Today we have, I'm Brett, by the way, and I help run this thing, and this is Blardo. And all right, there you go. So without further ado, please give a round of applause to Blardo. Which I didn't realize it was off. So what? Hey, I project. Years in chorus, kids, it teaches you things. Anyways, qualifying myself here. This was a problem that jumped up where I work today. This is a very material talk about me trying to understand the theory and concepts behind the modern identity management system in distributed architectures. It has become more challenging than it used to be because historically, we would go into a monolith and you would go, all right, identity is a simple concept. You enter a username, you enter a password, I find a user record, I persist it, yada, yada. I identify a session for you, and then you can come back as long as your session is valid. That works great when everything's in one place. The problem is that that's not true anymore. The modern stack has diverged. We have mobile applications, we have standard web applications, we have single-page JavaScript applications, and they all have to share the concept of an identity, who or what you are. So the other thing, and there is a slide on this specifically that I'll detail, but it's worth qualifying at the beginning here. Authentication and authorization are not the same thing. Hat tip to, I think it was Will who mentioned that in Slack earlier. They're very different, but they can be used together to actually build a better stack in the modern world. Sorry, I can't see my notes. So I'm going to discuss a technology that most people in this room have probably used, heard of, seen, or interacted with in some way without necessarily knowing it. So there's this piece of technology out there called OAuth. This is a I don't want to use the wrong word, but it's a delegation protocol, I guess is the best way to say that. Everyone says that it's for authorization. The problem is that's not true. OAuth is a series of protocols, like a meta protocol, I guess you could call it, in that it's composed of a bunch of different pieces of tech that work together to let you manage what other agents on your behalf can do with your access in any given security realm. So the term realm I may use interchangeably with like zone here, and I apologize for that, but effectively I'm describing a secure area within your application's logical construct, not necessarily physical. Those things are related but not necessarily coupled here. So OAuth gives us some cool things with regard to once I know who you are, what I can do. You may have logged in through GitHub, for instance, to CircleCI. This is a perfect example of using OAuth, and now they're actually implementing something else that I'll be talking about later called the OpenID Connect specification. So to finish my original thought, OAuth is powerful because it gives you the ability to say, this agent acting on my behalf has these rights. They last for this period of time, and they have the ability to get to this subset of my resources, I guess is the best way to say that. Sorry, I'm trying to find my vocabulary in here. Here we go. So OAuth behaves with a sequence of actors, and the protocols that OAuth implements are what allow us to do this right here. So you are the agent in this scenario, right? You are delegating access to your client application, be it your mobile device, be it the web application you're working with. You need to identify yourself to it. You get back an identifying token. That token is then used to pass your credentials down to the other server, again, where you have, Brett took my laser, alas. So you're the resource owner, you delegate access to your client, they go reach out to the resource server to query wherever the actual resource that you require are. Say, I need to get to your emails in your Gmail account. You may offer an OAuth credential to me, or I may issue one on my own behalf. Then I ask my client to reach out to Google. Google is going to authenticate the token that was passed to them and say, all right, is this valid? Does this person have the ability to get to the resources in question? And then they're also going to say, is it still within the scope? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I apologize. Like I said, I don't understand this as well as I need to. More than happy to admit that out loud. I've lost my train of thought completely. All right, starting back at the beginning of this, we'll describe the further back. I need to go higher back up the stack. Okay. Begin with a definition. I've completely blanked. I apologize. I feel like I'm about to faint. Hold on a second. Legitimately. All right. Apologies. Yeah, sorry. I need like 10 seconds. Yeah, sorry.
Checking it. There we go. So next week, of course, we won't be here as we have Thanksgiving, and you all should try to go be with your families. And then the week after, we have, what was that, December 3rd, I believe? And I believe Stuart is giving a talk on December the 3rd on APIs and their architecture. So you all should definitely come out for that one. On the 10th of December, we have Colin giving a talk on how React and Redux, in particular, will make your life better as a developer. So you should for sure come out to that. I guess that's about it. Chadev Christmas party.
We would be into a Chadev Christmas party. Yeah, that's enough people.
Okay.
That's enough people to have a party.
That is, without question.
What's everybody's favorite party venue?
Party venue?
Yeah, like where should we go? What here? Oh, it's somewhere. Here all the time.
That's right. Living here. I've installed a small cot in a back room.
Where do we go for this Newbie.js party? That worked out. Pretty good. Because we had okay. That's
I can confirm that fact. I have been in the storeroom.
the alcohol underneath the taps.
Yeah. Huh?
Not Chadev, but other.
I don't know. Does anybody have any events that you want to announce?
I'm going to
You ready to rock and roll?
Not quite yet.
All right.
I need to get to my notes.
Right there. So, let's see. Yes. High Tennessee, February. And where's it going to be at? Nashville, y'all. Get on it. An event apart also coming up. That's also in Nashville. You can still get your tickets for the low, low price of $1,300 to Event Apart. I think that one's got to take the cake for one of the more expensive conferences in the region. Let's see. Survey. So we've kind of been privately talking about CHADEV / Chattanooga Developer Community at large putting on a developer conference. How many people would be interested in that? I feel like Chattanooga needs one of those. We don't. Well, we have developer conferences, right, of various kinds, but we just have all this great equipment, and it seems a shame not to put one on when we have that kind of stuff. So, well, like probably interest-specific, right, is what I'm thinking. Like there's the DrupalCon. Other than that, I'm drawing a blank. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so probably going to be coming around before too long and start harassing you all to sit on a board and or participate in organizing such an event. Because, last week was TopCon, which was totally awesome. So, designer and UX people, folks have their little shindig, and I feel like, hey, we should have ours. So that's probably going to happen. TopCon is Chattanooga's design conference. It's the annual event, and they bring in speakers from all over. This year's keynote was Mr. Wayne White, who's a artist primarily now. Yeah, it was at Track 29 was the event space, and Wayne White is famously known for doing a lot or most of the set design on Pee-wee's Playhouse, also Beekman's World. So, if you remember that.
Coming up December 4th is
Number 972.
perhaps globally Picasso. Great event if you've never been to one.
All right.
All right.
Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
All right, round of applause for Blotter, everybody.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack. So, like I said, I was up tremendously late and I'm operating on not much sleep. So I'm going to change the way that I'm doing this just a hair. I'm going to go through this slide, define all of the individual actors in an OAuth request, And then I'm going to ask the folks who are in here to ask me a question about this so that I can at least regain my composure a hair. Once I'm there, I imagine I can catch my train of thought again. Like I said, what the basic 4 actors in any given system for OAuth are going to be the client, which is the element that's going to be making the request on your behalf. It effectively behaves as your proxy. There's an authorization server. Sometimes you'll hear that referred to as a gateway or an API gateway. Oftentimes that's where the dereferencing of a token is done and you put the user credentials back into the request in the header. You also have the resource owner, which in this context is you. You're the person who actually controls the access to the thing. You get to decide whether or not a client should actually be able to make a request on your behalf or not. And then the last thing is the resource server, which is the actual physical storage location of the thing you are trying to access. So in this case, a resource server may be Gmail's endpoint. It may have your actual emails on there. The authorization server, you may not realize this, but transparently, when you log in, is hitting accounts.google.com. Their little multi-login widget up there is enabled by using OAuth and the OpenID Connect spec to log you in to what is effectively a transparent auth proxy hiding under the scenes. So that's kind of the default scope. Again, there's tons of different protocols that facilitate this. But like I said, the reason that most people go into OAuth is that it affords you the ability to delegate access in a way that actually makes sense. Because you can revoke individual components. That's the big one, right? You issue a credential for Google, and then you can go in and edit and say, nah, you shouldn't be able to get this anymore, right? You have control over the apps that can act on your behalf. So that's the biggest one. The other advantage to using OAuth and OpenID in this scenario is the removal of passwords from having to cross service boundaries as frequently. There are a couple of different kinds of tokens that I can describe in the next slide here, but what we do is basically you authenticate one time, and then you get a token as long as it's outside your network that is immaterial. It doesn't mean anything to anybody else. It's ability to hide credentials. In the same way that you pass pass variables in your programs by reference or by value, you can do the same thing with OAuth tokens. So that's kind of the initial scope. I would like to try and take a couple of questions at the moment for who's worked with OAuth and what providers they've paired with. Did you go directly to a provider or go through a gateway is what I'm curious about. The social integrations, effectively? Okay.
Well, yeah, and also using like
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. So the Hangouts OAuth integration, I'm assuming, is basically the same as the standard Gmail account stuff?
you're always going through the
Account service.
Oh, okay. Fair. All right. And so, sure, I wanted to mention here was that the sharing of passwords between you and a third-party vendor is considered an anti-pattern these days. A lot of people will refer to it as the password anti-pattern. The other thing that seems to be really starting to tweak a lot of people that you're having to share honest credentials between services because it leads to potential compromises. So then this is with regard to OAuth scopes mentioning what you can control fine-grained access to. Everyone's seen this screen over here, I would assume. This was me pulling up on a drone page. But so this lets you say you can see my public information, not my private information. Say, for instance, on on GitHub, you are a member of multiple organizations. You can grant organization. So these are the types of tight-knit authorizations that you can, in a role-based level, power by using OAuth. Again, OAuth itself does not actually do the authorization. That's done on the identity provider's behalf. OAuth is the sequence of protocols and steps used to accomplish this goal. That is super important. Then we've got a few different types of tokens that come in with OAuth. You have, I guess, two that are commonly referred to in the abstract, and then bearer and holder of key tokens are more material types. Those are concrete implementations. An access token is what we would refer to the thing that your client is presenting to the API. Your access token is the thing that lets them go to your identity provider and then validate whether or not your token actually operates. There's also a refresh token. Refresh tokens are the ones that are sort of eternal. This is the one that is you to that identity provider. When you come through and you get a refresh token issued to you, you've got to protect that, because that refresh token is what you can use to issue yourself a new access token. It's a two-part sign, so basically I send my refresh token back and say, this is who I am as a user, give me back a temporary access with X scopes attached to it. So you can theoretically control very tightly by using refresh tokens to get new access tokens for yourself through the OAuth protocol as well. And again, you've got the two types I mentioned before. You've got a by value token and a by reference token. So the very clear delta there is that the by value token contains the information. So if it's intercepted on the wire, it potentially leaks credentials. It's worth noting that most of this stuff is handled in JOTs, which I'll be getting into in a second, JSON Web Tokens. That's a pretty well-defined spec. So if you leak those tokens over the wire, so if you're sending your requests over unencrypted pipes, like non-SSL channels, and they're intercepted, they can be decoded. So be aware of that as a huge potential hole in this from the beginning. But you can skip that by using a by reference token. So these are the tokens that you, like I mentioned earlier, typically use outside of your network. These are the ones that in your HTTP authorization header, you may see token X random string of characters. And until you can dereference that by using your identity gateway, nothing will ever be able to take advantage of that. There's no user information encrypted there. There's no server information there that's relevant. It is an arbitrary assignment of a string to a user that we can use as a reference. So that's kind of the easy way to keep those two things straight in your head. Then you also have the two material token types, which I mentioned. So you've got bearer tokens. These, took notes here so it was clear. These behave almost like currency. If you find currency on the ground, you can pick it up, go to a store, and spend it, because the authority of that currency is trusted by the vendor, right? That's probably the simplest comparison that I can make. You don't have to provide any additional credentials because it's cash, right? You've got real physical currency. But then there are holder of key style tokens, which is to say that just because I have a key does not mean that I intrinsically am identified. I require additional information to verify this. You may have played with all of this in your PIN numbers or your CVV code on your credit card now. Just having access to the physical thing is no longer sufficient. So those are holder of key style tokens, which are effectively, here's an initiation of this request. Please reach out to the identity provider and request additional information to authenticate this request. Those are the two common types that I've seen. There's a third one in there that's defined as an ID token. I'll get into that in a second. Again, the way that all of this is passed between each endpoint is done with a JSON Web Token, JWT, commonly called a JOT. So this is a really simple JSON structure. It's a two-part payload, and it includes some basic information that your receiver can pull out. It's worth noting also, parsing a JOT, the logic to do that, anyone in this room can write in 15 minutes. It requires a base64 decode of a minor string, so nothing terribly crazy. But that JOT includes the issuer of the token, where it came from, the subject or the authenticated uses of it, so the subject being you, the resource owner, who's the person. How you authenticated. So did you come through the gateway? Was it stored in your session? Was it pre-existing, pre-populated? And how old is that token? What was the creation of it? You can set expirations on both sides of tokens in all of these conversations. So your client store can say, oh, I need to update because I haven't looked back to the API in the last 2 weeks. Or you can have the token store say, if they send me a token that was created at 2 weeks ago, tell them that's no longer valid, they have to re-authenticate. So that's one of the ways that you can tightly control access there. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting that comes with this is you can pass the audience with your token. So you can say, who is it that's supposed to be able to see this token, right? Who's going to be able to interact with these things? The cool thing about these tokens is that the protocols that are defined by OAuth, you leverage them very well, but that's not the only thing for them. JOTs can be used for all other types of communication over the web. In fact, great example, without building out a crazy complex OAuth infrastructure, Zendesk offers a great JSON Web Token interface to your third-party APIs, where you don't have to store users in their system in any way, shape, or form. You can use pass-by-reference tokens that are just a simple JOT to log your user into their system without any knowledge on their side of your user base. They just need a callback URL that they can identify them out of. You can implement those same things using this tech. And so the other ones, I mentioned this earlier, but OAuth is a delegation protocol. It is not for authorization. The name sounds like it is, and its feature set even sounds kind of like it would at first glance, but the truth is OAuth is the protocol structure that's going to allow you to control these things. And then the other thing that's worth noting is that OAuth by itself is also not an authentication protocol. It can tell you who a user is by including that information, but it does not do the authentication. So authentication and identification, or authorization rather, let's split those, right? Identity, who you are. Authentication tells the system who you are. Authorization tells the system what you have access to. If you try and abuse OAuth in some way to turn it into a full-scale identity platform without going through these well-defined specs, you have a tendency to leak. This has been demonstrated numerous times. If your data is valuable, don't roll your own, listen to the spec. A lot of people collaborate on these tools to try and come up with them. They're really complicated and really hard to understand, but they're super powerful. And then the other thing is the term federation, I don't think I've defined yet, but effectively federation is the ability to grant access to other people within your realm on your behalf. That's kind of the definition of it. So it doesn't do that either. Like, it sounds like it would, but again, I have to reiterate, OAuth is just the protocol, or a set of protocols. Let's see. And then, so this gets us to the next thing. OAuth is cool. OAuth lets us intercommunicate between services about, what kind of information we can talk about, who I am, what I have access to, that sort of stuff. It's protocols that empower that. But so OpenID Connect came out. People decided Kerberos stinks, LTPA tokens stink, SAML getting there, getting pretty close to a usable protocol. A lot of people don't care for XML, and so the guys who put together OpenID, who were another kind of OAuth solution for a long time, they released what is effectively version 3 of their spec that's now called the OpenID Connect protocol. This is actually a federation specification. This brings in the idea of the gateway, and your gateway can store your user database, or it can delegate that to another system. So by bringing in the OpenID Connect specification, it lets you start issuing a new kind of token. So we have access tokens and we have refresh tokens. Now we're going to add in a new thing called an ID token. So when you start working with this, it's really kind of similar to what you're already expecting. The difference being you pass a new scope to the callback. You tell it that you want it to be OpenID. And so what's going to happen there is it's going to come back with some user data now. What's going to happen is the JOT in your request is going to be modified, and it's going to now contain these additional assertions in that comeback. So what you can do with these, your service, if you're, say, for instance, in a microservice architecture, no longer actually has to know anything about the user on the other side, unless you absolutely want to. Using this, you can pull back any arbitrary value that you assign from the OpenID Connect gateway and pass a user ID, for instance, back to that service and then persist a piece of information with just the ID. You don't store any of the information about your users with your service, and your dereferencing is handled at a gateway layer. So tokens coming from outside the network into the network are dereferenced and turned into an ID. So you get an ID token that gets stuck into your request. And now that request from that point going forward on anywhere in your internal, your safe security zone can now just pass its identity along as a JOT attached to the request. This is really where this got interesting, in my opinion. OAuth is fun and it works great for social authentication. Tools like OpenID Connect empower us to say, we can solve the problem of cross-service authentication in our own infrastructures by being okay with a reasonably well-known encoding standard and passing that standard around to each of our services. So this brings with it some assumptions that are a little bit uncomfortable. We have to get past the idea that we're sending something that includes potentially dangerous user data inside of our network. Once you get past that and you include this information, it's really not that hard because, again, as I mentioned before, it is still a JOT. So the serialization standard is uniform. So if you leak these messages outside of your network, or if you send a token over a non-encrypted pipe, it can be caught and pulled out. So that's why the default OIDC user spec only includes the following fields. It doesn't include any additional information unless you explicitly go tell it to do so. So it's trying to be protective of that. But the ultimate solution using these tools is truly to just go ahead and let your microservices all ingest a JOT that contains the ID token. Dereference it at your gateway layer. There are tools to do this in Nginx and Apache. There's a fork of Nginx called OpenResty that's actually designed to do this. It includes LDAP bindings and all kinds of cool stuff to let you delegate your authentication structures. You can also, using those tools, very easily make RESTful requests to a private user service if you're really into that sort of thing. You know, that all works really, really well using this set of tools. And I think that that is the majority of what I wanted to cover. The next thing is, I know there are questions from people because I covered this quickly and imprecisely. So I would be curious to hear if anybody has questions, if we have time. If not, please pull me aside after this. I would really, really like to chat about this out loud so that I can better understand it. Oh, and hold on, before I do that, I do have one other small set of things that I can actually pull open. This is a minor shill moment, and I don't mind admitting that. I was starting to play with this yesterday to try and find a provider who can do this. So full disclosure, what got me interested in OIDC was some internal concerns, but also this project got announced. So how do I run one of these gateways, right? Maybe I want to run it behind my firewall and I want to do some clever stuff inside. The guys over at CoreOS, who, if you're not familiar, are the sort of leading authority in the Docker ecosystem these days, they released this project recently that is a whole full-service gateway to do what I just described. It allows you to do token dereferencing and upgrading all of that information in one place. This can work with Google or any social auth provider you can imagine, because again, it's just OAuth. It also supports the ability to delegate to the other thing that I was playing with that turned out to be super useful. This service, Auth0, they are a hosted version of this. And so the way that they accomplish that goal is actually rather clever in that they provide you a hosted login box. So you put their JavaScript on your page or their library in your app. You log into their service, they pass back a JOT to your app. Your app never needs to know anything about users, so you can focus wholly on building small, well-defined services that do one thing and let the identity and authorization management happen at a very pretty UI that has fantastic logging. So you can see all the times that I've failed at various times. You can see all of the individual failures. and it'll give you all of the debug information for your tokens, all of the IDs passing back and forth. And then over here, going to the connection types, I only have Twitter enabled here, but if you were to, for instance, want to set up a new connection type, so they offer, in terms of social integrations, these are all in the can. So any one of these can behave as your delegated source of identity. Tremendous amount of information. They also support your standard enterprise tools. You can pull these into AD if you need to. I'm sorry. Or the one that was really interesting, and a lot of people here, I imagine, could use this. Google Apps integration here works. So if you run your business in a fashion that uses Google Apps as your primary authentication backend, that will give you the ability to stop caring about identity outright. You can just let this service, or there are others that do the same thing. I cannot remember any off the top of my head. But they'll actually handle storing your users, giving you the last time they logged in, expiring their tokens, rotating credentials, all of that automatically. And you can further delegate that down the stack. So, for instance, Dex can use this as a delegated OAuth authority, who can then reach out to Google on their behalf. So by using this chain of delegation, each step in the chain has the ability to refute an assertion on behalf of the person who is acting for them. So it gives you a really interesting set of gateways that you can use to control access down the chain. So if, for instance, you wanted to keep your private users private, you could host a Dex instance behind your firewall, integrate with Auth0 for your public access, and very easily segment those two things into physically disparate databases that were logically in the same place. Pretty cool set of tools. I would heartily recommend it. They include 2FA through their shared login prompt and everything. So if that's a concern in your organization, they support you outright. But I think that's most of it. And then the other things that are worth checking out, Jot.io and the OAuth.net spec, they're all super detailed in the way that all of this stuff works. There's a tremendous amount of information that I didn't get anywhere near covering that I would heartily recommend everyone here get into and spend some time with, because identity management is the most common security concern that I have personally seen in modern web era. So I would heartily recommend that if you spend time identifying people and then saying what they can and can't do, you spend some time checking out these specs directly, and then give Auth0 a shot. Like I said, it really has helped me understand this a little better and provided a low friction way to do this type of integration.
If anybody needs to head out, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, you got time for a couple questions?
Yeah, I'm good.
If we have any, anybody have any questions?
Probably not.
Yay or nay? Let me get you this mic.
So let's say you prototyped with Auth0, and that all works great, and then you say, okay, now I don't want to depend on that third-party service for authentication, because if that goes down, I'm toast.
Right.
So can you like export or mirror to a Dex instance and then have that as your failover?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can tell Auth0 how you want to store data. You can have it persist into, for instance, an RDS instance on your behalf. It will actually delegate out to whatever backend or federation you want it to. So it can behave as a storage engine itself and do the SSO by itself, which is an option, or you can tell it to delegate to other services to do that for you. And so in that event, you would just pull out the Auth0 libraries, go towards a standard Jot implementation, and then write your own. It wouldn't be that complex.
Anybody else? All right, we will see you all in 2 weeks. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Round of applause for Belardo.